Seeking the truth never gets old, even when it hides in the shadows. Immerse yourself in the world of June's Journey, a free-to-play hidden object game set in the roaring 20s. Solve the mystery of the devious gossip spreader and celebrate our 7th anniversary with exclusive events, never-before-seen decorations, thrilling mysteries, and exciting giveaways. The adventure and the gossip awaits. Are you ready for the journey? Download June's Journey today for free on Android or iOS.
This is Find Your Dream Job, the podcast that helps you get hired, have the career you want, and make a difference in life. I'm your host, Mac Pritchard. I'm also the founder of Mac's List. It's a job board in the Pacific Northwest that helps you find a fulfilling career. Every Wednesday, I talk to a different expert about the tools you need to get the work you want. A job interview isn't a legal deposition. As with any business meeting, you need to know what you want to accomplish before you walk into the room. Ann Tropea is here to talk about why you need to do more in an interview than answer questions. She's the co-host of the Career Bitches podcast and is also an author, a public speaker, and an advisor for student media at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And she joins us from Baltimore, Maryland. Well, let's jump right into it, Ann. Legal deposition. Some candidates actually do this. They think when they walk into the interview room, their job is to answer the questions and then their work is done. Is that a good strategy?
It is a strategy. It's not one that I would generally advise. First of all, it doesn't really set up a very conversational dynamic. And let's face it, you're almost never under oath during a job interview. So there's no reason to kind of sit there and answer questions as if, you're in front of a jury. Again, it doesn't really create the kind of rapport that you're looking for in what really should be just a conversation.
And I think people who do that, it's well-intentioned. They think that, well, the employer has a set of questions and I want to make sure I answer them all. Is that what you think is typically going on when that happens?
Sure. Most people do not interview often. I have happened to interviewed a lot just in my career for various reasons and developed a theory of, what you're supposed to be doing during an interview. I think, going into it, wanting to answer questions and filling gaps for your potential employer, of course, important. Yes, I'm definitely not advising to not answer the questions that are asked, but there's a little bit more to it than that. And some of that comes from the fact that your potential employer, they may not interview very often, right? They may not be sure what they want to know. And so this is really an opportunity for you as the person being interviewed to, yes, answer the questions asked as clearly and completely as you can, but also understand that your potential employer may not have a full picture of what they should be asking you. And so that's an opportunity for you as the person sitting there in the interview to kind of help them along that path and maybe go beyond, the four corners of the questions.
I'm glad you made that point because I think sometimes an applicant may think that the person sitting across the table from them is an expert interviewer who's trained in it. And as you say, many people don't do job searches frequently, so they don't have a lot of experience in interviewing. And that can be the case for the hiring manager as well. Now, when an applicant only answers questions, and what does an interviewer typically think of a candidate like that?
Again, I tend to approach interviews as an opportunity for a conversation. It would be very one-sided if you're sitting down and having coffee with a friend and only answer questions that they ask specifically and then sit there silently for the rest of the coffee chat. Of course, some interviews are going to be more formally structured. And if that's the case, then definitely, go with the flow and kind of read the room and figure out what style of interview you're in, I think you probably have a pretty good idea, dependent on the type of job that you've applied for, the company that you're potentially going to be working with, how straight-laced, and how formal the interview process is. Sometimes, you don't really know until you show up. And of course, if you're in a virtual interview, it definitely changes the dynamic, right? But again, I think the point here is that it's important to treat the interview as a conversation, as a back and forth exchange of information, and not just a one-sided, you ask and I answer.
Well, you mentioned you have a theory about this, and I know you have 3 particular recommendations for how to stand out in an interview by asking questions and doing more than just answering questions. Before we get there, in general, Ann, what kind of questions have you found that employers hope that candidates will ask when they're in the interview seat?
I think, employers don't want to hear questions that everybody asks. And there are 1,001 resources out there that tell you, give you kind of standard, what you should ask in an interview. I think that employers want to know that they're special, that you did your homework, that you cared enough to really think about what you want to know. They're looking for thoughtfulness. They're looking to see that frankly, that you know what you're talking about, right? And you've done some real thinking and have good questions that are specific to that employer and that demonstrate that you're thinking beyond just getting the job, right? You're thinking beyond the offer letter. You're thinking about, well, what am I going to be doing in 6 months to a year? What would be good for me to know now? I think those types of questions are always welcomed from potential employers, and you certainly can't go wrong by, again, do your homework, please, before you go into your interview.
Well, let's talk about the 3 recommendations you have for what you can do in an interview beyond answering questions. And your first one is when you ask questions, one of the benefits is that it creates and builds a personal connection with the interviewer. How does this happen? And when you ask a question of a hiring manager when you're in the interview room?
Mm-hmm. One technique that I have experienced and I have heard from clients over and over is that it's really important to create that connection and that rapport at the very beginning of the interview. There is usually an awkwardness if you're sitting across the table from one person or maybe a panel of interviewers, or if you're online, maybe a whole host of people in your Zoom interview. You as the interviewee have the opportunity to use that kind of awkwardness at the beginning when no one is really sure who's going to start talking first or, how it's going to work, to kind of jump in and break the ice, so to speak. You can be the one as the interviewee to, ask where everyone is calling in from, if it's a Zoom meeting, or make a joke if that feels comfortable for you. I am often the one going the joke route or making some small talk with the people that you're sitting down with. Now, if you've done your homework, as I've mentioned, you have sufficiently stalked everyone on Google and LinkedIn and whatever social media, company websites, figured out where everyone went to school, where they're from, any point of commonality or similarity that you can bring up. This would be a really good place to do that. And you can say something like, "Oh, hey, Mr. X, Y, and Z, I saw you went to NYU. I'm also an NYU alum. When were you there, et cetera, et cetera." And again, it's just a way to create a quick personal connection with the people that you're sitting with so that they're predisposed to like everything you say after that.
Let's pause here, Ann. I want to take a break. I want to dig in a little more into this topic about how you make that connection in the first moments of an interview. So stay with us. When we return, Ann Tropea will continue to share her advice on why you need to do more in an interview than answer questions. What's the best way to learn a language? Immersion. Live where the language is spoken and use it every day. I know this from firsthand experience. When I was in college, I spent a semester in Mexico City. I lived in a boarding house where no one spoke English, and my Spanish got really good. But if you can't go abroad this year, you can still learn a language, and that's with Babbel. I use Babbel's courses to maintain and improve my Spanish, and I see the benefits every day. I'm not surprised. One study found that using Babbel for 15 hours is equivalent to a full semester at college. And all of Babbel's 14 award-winning language courses are backed by a 20-day money-back guarantee. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/dreamjob. That's spelled BABBEL.com/dreamjob. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Your teen requested a ride, but this time not from you. It's through their Uber teen account. You drive your teenager around, a lot, to their friend Jacob's house, their other friend Jake's house, to James's, to Jaden's, to Jalen's, to...
Mom? This is Jake's house, not Jacob's.
Now with an Uber teen account, your teen can request a ride under your supervision. They'll ride with a highly rated driver, and with live trip tracking, you'll follow along the whole ride to their friends' houses that all sound the same. Add your teen to your Uber account today. See app for details.
Bye, Mom.
We're back in the Max List studio. I'm talking with Ann Tropea. She's the co-host of the Career Bitches podcast. Ann is also an author, a public speaker, and an advisor for student media at the University of Maryland in Baltimore County. And she joins us from Baltimore, Maryland. Now, Ann, before the break, we were talking about why you need to do more in an interview than answer questions. And there are three recommendations you have for how to do this, to do more than just simply respond to questions from an employer. And the first one was look for ways to build connections and rapport with the interviewers in the first moment of the conversation. And you talked about, in the first segment, looking for common connections and doing the research that would help you to make those links. What advice do you have, Ann, for someone who might be shy? And, I was certainly much shyer earlier in my life. Some of us are just built that way, who is uncomfortable with small talk. What have you seen work with your clients?
That's such a great question. I am a big proponent of the fake it till you make it school of thought. So if you are someone who feels uncomfortable making that first step, I would say do it anyway. And just, try at least to start some conversation. If it's awkward for everyone all around, it's just going to be an uncomfortable, 30 minutes, hour, however long your interview is. I guarantee you'll feel better if you can at least say a few words. If it has to be about the weather or baseball or whatever you feel comfortable generally chatting about people, like in the line at the grocery store, do that. And if that's really just way outside of your comfort zone, then take the opportunities that come up in that early conversation to kind of make the interview a little bit less formal, a little bit more conversational in whatever way kind of makes sense. And a lot of this advice has to do with, being able to read the room that you're in and know the audience that you're talking to. So it is a little bit of, kind of wait and see who the conversation is going to be with. But, it's not the end of the world if you just can't work in that joke that you've been desperate to use. And I've had to let that go for sure during interviews. It's not always time for a joke.
Yeah, there always is a limited amount of time for interviews, isn't there? Well, a second benefit of doing more than answering questions in an interview is that, and a reason why candidates need to do that is it allows you to share important ideas and information that you want an employer to know about you. Uh, how how do you do that, Anne? How can questions or other techniques help you deliver the messages that you want an employer to know about you?
Right. So, something that I always recommend to clients is before you go into the interview, make a short list of 3 things that you really want the potential employer to know. They can be things that are on your resume or in your cover letter, but they might not have made it into either of those documents or any of your application information because, right, you have limited space on your resume and your cover letter, and you can't truly give a full picture of who you are as a new team member from either of those things. But what you can do is decide, I know I really need this employer to know this about me. Find a way to work that in your responses to their questions. If they ask you, there is almost always an opportunity to answer a question that's been asked and then say, related to that, I also wanted to share X, Y, and Z, right? So you can use interview questions as not just a means of communicating the answer, but you can use those questions as a jumping off point to make sure that you're able to share everything that you feel like it's important for your potential employer to know.
How do you make those choices before you walk into the interview room when you're compiling that list of your 3 top points you want an employer to know? Is it connected to the employer's needs? What do you recommend?
Yeah, I always do a deep dive into the job description. And again, grain of salt, right? Not every job description is written well. Not every job description, frankly, is written accurately. But that's really what you've got to go off of. So if they have hammered home a certain skill set or experience in a certain area, I would definitely make sure to highlight. That would be one thing I would want to highlight in the interview, even if you've submitted your resume and it's that information is in your resume. I think it's a lot to assume that everyone interviewing you has read your resume with any degree of care or detail. And that may sound a little cynical. However, people are busy. Maybe they read your resume and liked it enough to give you an interview, but they didn't read it line by line with the kind of attention that, as the writer of that resume, you might hope that they would.
Your third recommendation for what you should do in an interview besides answer questions is to look for ways to control the flow and the direction of the conversation. And this might sound counterintuitive to a lot of our listeners because, after all, Ann, isn't the employer in charge of this conversation?
I think approaching it as a hierarchy is a mistake. Yes, the people that are interviewing you likely have some questions they want to ask. But again, this is a back and forth. This is a two-way exchange. And your engagement in the interview, the way that you engage in the interview, says a lot about you as a candidate and as a potential new member of the team. So the interview is really an opportunity for you to show that type of leadership and ability to shift the conversation. And it can be tricky to do that on the fly. Practicing in advance will help for sure. But when you're answering questions, think about ways that you can use that question again. Use it as a jumping off point to make the point you want to make and not necessarily just give kind of an an answer to like the exact question asked. For sure, answer the question asked. Again, that's always a good idea. But you can also go beyond that and expand and make connections that maybe your potential employer didn't even think about.
So to sum up, look for ways to make connections and build rapport in the first moments of an interview. Think about your top 3 key points that you want to make about yourself, your candidacy, and the benefits to an employer, and look for ways to deliver those messages by taking control of the flow of the conversation. Any questions you shouldn't ask in an interview? We've been talking a lot about the ways to deliver your messages and use questions and other techniques to build rapport. But anything that you would avoid not doing?
Don't ask about vacation hours or hybrid work policies unless that is, the culture of that company and you've done your research and this is a thing that they do. Anything where it seems like you're already trying to figure out how to not be at work as often is probably a bad idea.
Well, it's been a terrific conversation, Ann. Now, tell us what's next for you.
Again, I'm the co-host of the Career Bitches podcast, and we are ramping up for production of season 5. So we have 4 seasons that you can find Spotify, Apple, etc., wherever you find your podcasts, and continuing to consult for Career Valet. It's a woman-owned business services company that I started working for back in 2019. And that's where I learned how to write an amazing resume. So you should definitely check them out. Also, just wanted to give a quick shout out to my students at The Retriever, the student-run and edited newspaper at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County.
Terrific. I do hope listeners will check out your show. You and your co-host, Marcel Yeager, do a wonderful job, and I enjoy it a lot. So it's a great program, and you're doing great work. I know listeners can learn more about you and your work at Career Bitches, Career Valet, and at the University of Maryland at Baltimore County by connecting with you on LinkedIn. We'll be sure to include a URL in the show notes. Now, and given all the great advice you've shared today, what's the one thing you want a listener to remember about why you need to do more in an interview than answer questions?
This is an opportunity for you as the interviewee to tell your story, right? Take control of your narrative and feel empowered in the process. So I encourage everyone to do that. And I hope everyone will approach interviewing as a fun thing to do instead of something that's dreaded.
Next week, our guest will be Johan Mehta. He's a career coach who helps you stand out, get job offers, and maximize your salary. Ask someone how to find a job, and you'll often get the same 3 answers. Visit job boards, go to career fairs, apply online. Each method can work, but everybody else is doing the same thing. Join us next Wednesday when Johan Mehta and I talk about 4 unconventional ways to get hired. Until next time, thanks for letting us help you find your dream job. This show is produced by Max List. Susan Thornton-Hoff schedules our guests and writes our newsletter. Lisa Kislin-Berry-Anderson manages our social media. Our sound engineer and editor is Matt Fiorillo. Dawn Mole creates our transcripts. And our music is by Freddie Trujillo. This is Mac Pritchard. See you next week.
At your job, do you ever have to deal with a nose roller? How about a snub pulley? Well, if you're installing a new conveyor belt system, dealing with the different components can sound like you're speaking a foreign language. Luckily, you've got a team ready to help. Grainger's technical product specialists are fluent in maintenance, repair, and operations. So whenever you want to talk shop, just reach out. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.